thanks to Dr. Garge and the Directorate of Archaeology and Museums Maharashtra for inviting me here today. Very good morning to all of you. My topic today is on the Maratha military landscapes, a very fascinating subject, and something that I was introduced to around in 2016-17 when I was first invited to look at the forts of Maharashtra and look at possible inscription on World Heritage, because we had just got the Rajasthan hill forts inscribed. And since then, we got, like in 2022, we got to work on the actual nomination dossier for the Maratha military forts. And it's really fascinating to see this landscape, because I have studied the military landscape across India, or even if you say across the world, you would not find this kind of concentration of forts anywhere else. So my focus is not so much on the built heritage conservation, but more on the larger landscape approach and management as it is required in case of World Heritage. This is, the timeline that we are following for the Maratha military landscape. The dossier is, almost complete, and of course the final dossier, every year from India only one dossier is submitted, and we don't know whether it will be the Maratha military landscape or any other this year, because there are already 4 or 5 dossiers ready, and finally it is the PM who decides which dossier will go. But as far as our work is concerned, with the Directorate of Archaeology, we have a technically sound ready dossier for submission at this stage. My presentation will look into what is a military landscape. We really need to see across India, the peninsula, and the entire region. There is a large variation of military landscapes, and what was the Maratha military landscape, and management and conservation as a World Heritage Site. So this is the map of Maharashtra with all the forts tentatively mapped, and you can see the large variation or concentration that you have. In overall, when we looked at forts in India, there are a total of 6,000 that we inventoried for a NITI Aayog report, and more than 600 are actually in Maharashtra. Among these, as we know, during the reign of Chhatrapati Shivaji Maharaj, there were 90 plus forts that were created to form a network, which is what we see as the Maratha military landscape. So, among these, it took us some time. I personally, along with our team members, traveled to more than 30 forts across Maharashtra, and looked at the final selection which will go into this nomination, and finally we came up with the 12 forts that were the key forts controlling all the various clusters and regions. So this is sort of a representation. We looked at the Maratha military timeline, and moving on from the time of Shahaji, when he was looking at Shivneri as one important fortification in that particular zone, and we move on to the various others on how Chhatrapati Shivaji expanded first, from the Mawal region, then later on to north to Salher and others, and then down south to Jinji, and simultaneously, of course, the Konkan coast, which was very important for trade and economy. So based on this analysis and finding the representative forts, we could actually look at each region and which fort needs to be selected. And this was done in consultation with the local historians. Dr. Paradkar was an important team member of our dossier preparation, and we also had consultation with Dr. Mehendale. His book on Chhatrapati Shivaji was very important for our references. We looked at the attributes that would be selected: the location on ancient and medieval trade routes, the strategic geographic context, whether it could be on the coast, Konkan coast, Sahyadri hills, or others, and we also suggested inclusion of Jinji as the third capital, without which the Maratha military landscape would not be complete. So it had to have representation of various Maratha powers. We were looking from 17th century, from the time of Shahaji, but also whether they were useful later on to the Peshwas. So those records and diaries were also looked into. And of course exceptional features of the Maratha military architecture, which would be in terms of defense mechanisms, the kind of special structures they had, the Mahadarwaja, the Balakila or the Chilkati Burj. So all those features were looked into for the final selection, and these were the primary forts that were finally selected. There are 12 forts in total in different varying physiographic terrains and protected under the Directorate of Archaeology, as well as 4 of them are under the Directorate of Archaeology, where Khanderi and the Pratapgarh Fort are in the process of notification, and the rest remaining with the Archaeological Survey of India. So this is the final total number of forts, and it is important to understand what is their outstanding universal value, because these forts have been there, since Satvahana's time, or by the, during the Bahmani Sultanates. But what is unique in this particular network is, though the military planning in this region is shaped by several superseding dynasties, it was really during the Maratha rule that it became legible as one of the largest extended fortified landscapes in the Indian subcontinent. So this is what is the unique feature of this as a military landscape, because the understanding of Chhatrapati Shivaji Maharaj of the entire terrain from Konkan coast to Sayadaris, Mawal, and across the Deccan Plateau to the Eastern Ghat, getting on to Jinji, is truly unique. And how to create this network to counter the sea forts, to the sea powers on the coast and the land powers like the Mughals. So this is what is unique about this nomination, and we have 3 criteria on which we would like to nominate it. One is, of course, how it is outstanding as an example of type of building or landscape, which is criteria 4. I think the first one is criteria 3, which is about the military planning itself and the Maratha military tradition. The second is it as an excellent landscape ensemble or landscape of the Maratha military, and lastly it is criteria 6, which is the association. This is probably one of the rare areas where you actually see forts being worshipped like temples, and the association that is of the locals that you have with Chhatrapati Shivaji Maharaj. So looking at these 3, why I'm saying these are the values, and as per World Heritage operational guidelines, the management or protection is actually of the outstanding universal value. So basically these 3 criteria, once we nominate it and it gets inscribed, then the management plans have to address that they are protecting these 3 values, and they have to show how each value is protected, and the sites have to be monitored ensuring that. So it's not just the fortification itself or the fort structure, but also the landscape component, which will become important in this case. And why World Heritage emphasizes on this, like they have these 3 pillars of outstanding universal value on which it gets inscribed. So the first is that it meets the criteria, like the criteria I showed you. They would evaluate whether it meets, or maybe they just accept 1 or 2 of those criteria. And then, does it have integrity and authenticity? In most cases, in case of the forts of Maharashtra, they retain their local character, local material, and the setting itself. So the authenticity is there. Integrity comes with the property boundary, but the protection and management is really critical. So if that fails, then the outstanding universal value is questioned, and there are sites that have gone off from the list. They get delisted from UNESCO if protection and management is not there. The last example we saw was in 2021 when Liverpool was delisted from the UK World Heritage List. So this is a key concern with protection and management. And for this purpose, to have an integrated management approach, an overarching management authority is required by the World Heritage Committee. And it is suggested that there will be a Fort Apex Advisory Committee under the chairmanship of Chief Secretary, which would have representations from other areas like the Principal Secretary for Forests, Principal Secretary for Tourism, Regional Director ASI, as well as SA Mumbai and Chennai Circle, because of Gingy being part of this, all district collectors, NGOs and relevant history experts who are involved in the management of the property area as well as the buffer zone. And then it can have an executive committee at district level, and then of course the site managers, or how ASI and archaeology, state archaeology actually implement the projects. So this just shows on the right side the site management plans, what it would have for each fort, looking at all the verticals, from environment, landscape, tourism, visitor management to conservation, infrastructure, disaster management. The policy framework proposed for this is at 3 levels. At international level, we refer to the ICOFORT Charter, which is a charter on the fortifications and military heritage, endorsed by ICOMOS, which is the advisory body for UNESCO for cultural sites. A national conservation policy of ASI for the protected monuments, which would provide especially structures on how to prepare the SMP and what all aspects to cover, but most importantly the local and regional level, because this is the Maratha military landscape and you can actually derive certain policies from the other Nepatra. So we specifically looked at chapters on forts and mention of in other Nepatra, and we could here you can see the ICOFORT Charter, which actually focuses also on landscape and other aspects, and it says that fortifications are a different kind of heritage than any other. You need to really have a mind and an expert telling you what are the defense mechanisms used. Often we get into restoring a fort wall. It's not just using stone and lime, but it is also understanding what was the shape of the loophole, or what was the structure used for before actually going in for restoration. And we have seen across India a lot of cases where fort walls have been restored just like a wall being made without understanding the defense mechanism that was used in there. So national policy for conservation that I've already mentioned, where you're looking at sustenance of their physical fabric and overall effective management. And other Nepatra, which actually specifically talks about, so in this again you can see that what was the Maratha policy for keeping their forts intact, and the relevance of landscape was very important on how the forests should be kept, obviously for defense purpose, and how certain spaces could have certain kind of vegetation, including there is evidence that there were vegetable gardens in the area, and how they were nurtured. So it's a very sustainable kind of strategy that was there, and this is something that we should adopt in our policy today. Fortification, the other one either should be destroyed or it should be also captured. So you would always find the twin forts, or at times even the peaks, three peaks being used for fortification. And this is a closer look at Saler and Salota, and looking at the first layer of fortification, the second layer and the third layer, and finally the citadel fortification. So we've just marked the gates, water tanks, the single bastions and the double bastions, depending on the where it was being constructed and what kind of defense it would be used for, and even the triple bastions in certain cases. And looking at the landscape itself, on how the peaks were strategically used, in some cases just straight away for defense, but in other cases with a slight fortification added to it. And this is a general state of conservation. So in some cases, like in case of Saler, we had pointed out, and it was noted by the Directorate of Archaeology in terms of line pointing, that it should be because this is a fort that is very inaccessible, very few people go on it. So that's why any conservation being done there, it's very difficult to monitor, and one needs to be there constantly to ensure that the right approach is there. So certain works have been carried out now as per the site management plan, which is recently commissioned. There would be a more conscious approach, and also as per the nomination strategy. So this is how we are creating sort of an action plan, looking at what is critical in the fort, what needs to be taken up immediately in 6 months to 2 years, and then 2 to 5 years. And this is what the detailed site management plan would actually elaborate further. I'm just going to go through the forts and talk about the landscape itself. Again, you can see the Junar region and all the forts and the fortifications, the first, second and third layer of Shivneri, which was birthplace of Chhatrapati Shivaji Maharaj, but it was never really captured during his reign, and it was really during Shahji's period and later on also during the Peshwa period that at certain points it was managed by the Marathas. And this is the timeline and the sections showing the landscape component and how the defense including from Nani Ghats, how the other forts Jeevdhan and Chawand were significant in the surrounding area, and how the fortifications and gateways are located. Shivneri already has a site management plan commission which is already ready, and the Directorate of Archaeology is getting it approved by ASI for implementation. So I won't go into the details of these. In case of Lohagarh, another significant fort, very strategically located because it was really from the Mawal region to all other sides. And you can see the number of fortifications around it that were critical and the number of ghats. I mean, the significance of each fort can be actually judged by the number of ghats that were controlled by the fort. So in this case, I mean, this of course is very, very important fort which was captured and recaptured by various dynasties at various times. And of course you have the layer of Chhatrapati Shivaji Maharaj here. You see the caves, how they were reused as treasuries later by him, the historic caves. You have the twin fort of Visapur here, and this is the layering of the fortification. So why this layering is important? Unless we understand this layering and the style that each had, there is no point of going for restoration work, because each has a different character out here. And the bastions also. So this just shows how where the water tanks, the single bastions and the double bastions are located, and the defense mechanism for this particular fort. What is very significant here and exceptional are the gateways, which were actually done by the Peshwas later. So you see these gateways which do not allow for any blind spot and are excellent as a defense mechanism. So here you see these exceptional features. So each of the 12 fort has some exceptional feature, because of which it has been selected, which is different from the other fort. And that's part of the UNESCO nomination, because you need to have a different attribute which is exceptional in each case. It can't be repetitive. So these are the details of the gateways of Lohagarh, the kind of loopholes, the cavaliers and the cannon spaces that you see here, the embrasures in the parapet, are a more evolved kind that you see out here. And this is the general state of conservation and the issues that we see. Of course, there was a recent issue of heavy visitation, and that is a major concern in most of these forts. When you have too many visitors and the access is narrow, how to manage that. And again, like a sort of a timeline on what can be taken up first and what needs to be done later. Khanderi, which was another strategical sea fort, developed during the last phase of Chhatrapati Shivaji Maharaj, and there were battles fought here, but very critical fort because of the way the island was located and how the entire fortification was constructed. This was one fort that the British were very concerned when they got the Mumbai port, and this being a key issue. Because it was with the Port Authority, there have been a lot of later interventions here which need to be taken care of, and this is some of our pictures from the site visit where we feel there is a concern that needs to be addressed, especially if it's going to be nominated on the World Heritage List. Raigarh, it's being conserved now under the Raigarh Development Authority, and of course one of the most, the capital, second capital for Chhatrapati Shivaji Maharaj, and one of the most extensive fort in terms of its defense, in terms of its range of typology of structures that you see, including the bazaars and the royal quarters, which you don't usually find in any of the other forts. So the defense, again looking at all the surrounding forts, the number of ghats it has, and then the twin fort of Lingana, which is where for monitoring it. These are the layers of fortifications and the single, double, triple bastion, and it really uses the natural terrain to its maximum potential for defense. These are the macro sections showing Raigad and Lingana and how the defense strategy worked, where the Mahadarwaza is located and the other Buruj. Rajgarh, his first capital, which is again one of the most unique forts in terms of its planning, because each fortification, each area works as a separate fort. So the three machis are fortified in themselves besides the Bale Killa. So you can see the number of defense mechanisms here. This is the timeline, and here you can see the surrounding forts that were used for. And Raigad and Rajgarh actually have a defense mechanism that supports each other because of the surrounding fortifications. But here you can see, the first level of fortification, the second and the third, and how each machi can function like an independent fort in itself in case of an attack. So it's really one of the most unique planning that you don't find anywhere else in any other fort. This is showing the Bale Killa area, which is the most protected and topmost area. And the three machis, the Padmavati machi, where you can see the bastions, the water bodies, and all the supporting. The Sanjeevani machi, which is really unique, and you can see the planning of Sanjeevani machi. This kind of machi is not found anywhere else in any other fort. So you can see the levels, and how there is a false wall completely, and then there is another one. And the way this machi has been designed, it's really truly exceptional as a defense mechanism. And of course the Suvela machi. So this fort itself has, even the darwazas are, very uniquely designed for defense. You can see out here. What is very interesting is when you look at the site terrain is how they designed, and actually they got the machis at the same level, the gates. So this is when we looked at the sections, we realized that they are at the same level. Like you can see Sanjeevani machi and Suvela machi in the fourth section. And this shows that when they were planning the fort, there must have been someone who would have stood on a hill across, looked at that and looked at a marker. But it's amazing that that kind of accuracy is achieved, and this is one example, but you have this kind of accuracy in designing of the fortifications and a lot of others which we are still researching on. Pratapgarh, which of course is known for the battle with Afzal, these are the series of events that took place there. The kind of course, right in the middle of the forest area, it is an excellent example of forest typology of forts with the surroundings. And also, if we look, this is one of the first fortifications. You can see the ideas, where you see the machis more evolved in case of Rajgarh, but this is the first kind where you see a single fortified three-layered fortification. So in fact, if we look at the entire fort, it is sort of like an extended machi out here. And these are the details showing the surroundings of the Javli forest, which really worked very well for its defense, and how the bastions were located strategically in each of the viewpoints of access, and the details of the bastions out here. So this shows the posterns and the main gate and how the entire fort was planned, including the indirect entrance for the gateway. the state of Pratapgarh, because it is and has been under the trust, and there are certain concerns, there are people living on it, there are issues of encroachments, again that needs to be addressed in the site management plan. There is a draft site management plan already prepared, which would be adopted as it gets notified, and a detailed action plan. Swarndurg, which is under the ASI, one of the most unique sea forts, because you can see, the plateau on which the fortification stands. Otherwise, you have the sea forts just coming directly, from the water. So this has a unique geology that needs to be understood while addressing conservation works here. But this is also currently, not, it has too much vegetation growth and has not been accessed, like there are places which are inaccessible. Even we could not go to all the areas of the fort. So this definitely needs to be taken up urgently. It shows the surrounding fortifications and how the triangle works in terms of defense, and the bastions themselves, and the first and the second layer of fortification that exist in Swarndurg. Sindhudurg, I'm sure most of you are familiar, one of the most extensively studied and researched forts of Chhatrapati Shivaji Maharaj, as it came up as a counter to Janjira, and how Padamgarh and Rajkot Fort worked in association with this, so for all the naval activities, how these were supporting Sindhudurg, and in the larger region macro level. So this shows, the routes, how the defense mechanism worked, what were the watch points, and how the control was kept. And in detail the bastions. Again, this has not been really recorded properly. Its fort wall itself, which is so extensive, but the kind of cavaliers and loopholes that it has. And this is something that we are still, some of them we are still trying to figure as per access. It has other interesting aspects like the quarry area there, which was used, for construction of the fortification. Vijayadurg is another significant fort since Raja Bhoj's time, and has very important layers. But of course, how it was used by the Marathas and later on Angres, both the Swarndurg and Vijayadurg. And there are very good records of this fort, the battles fought by the Marathas during the Anglo-Maratha War also. These are the details showing, the gateways which are distinct, the bastions, and of course the natural wall in the sea that was used for defense, which is, the undersea wall, which was used for stopping the ships. So this worked very well as a defense mechanism for the fort. And Panhala, this is the last one. I will not be showing Jinji since we are talking specifically of Maharashtra. But looking into Panhala, again, another very significant fort with the historic layers. This is a historic map from City Palace, Jaipur, which actually has Jai Singh's complete record of the Deccan forts since he was studying it to dialogue with Chhatrapati Shivaji Maharaj, and to look at how Mughals can conquer these forts. So, of course, it has Pavangarh, which was later fortified by the Marathas, so showing the strategy that they always used of adjoining fortification in the landscape. And looking at all the layers of fortification here and the bastions, this is also looking at, the gateway locations. This is one of the British period maps of Panhala and Pavangarh. And such maps were created during the Anglo-Maratha War, but looking at specifically the issues, understanding the problem here, we really need to look at, I'm just going into a bit of detail in this last fort, but looking at environmental, geological, material maintenance issues, why the stones are getting deteriorated, or getting into detailed studies. And some of these have been undertaken. In case of forts, we also need to look at the geomorphology. In case of Panhala, it is evident from the landslide zonation map that there is an issue of landslide here, which would be there in many forts, and that comes into a larger environmental zone. So often, I mean, we may just be restoring the fort wall, but if the base itself is not strong, it's going to slip away. And it's not only in Panhala, you see it in the Sanjeevani Machi when you're going to that in Rajgarh, and you see that, you know, there is a regular erosion. So that should be the first thing to address, because unless you have the base right there, and this is beyond just the Directorate of Archaeology, we need to dialogue with the Environment and Forest Department and look at you know, solutions for these so that the original fort wall doesn't fall away. This is just showing the previous works and studies that were carried out and issues of damage, whether it's vegetation or natural issues like the deterioration of fortification, bulging, loose and missing stones. And it's quite a challenge, of course, to conserve this. I mean, you can imagine the manpower and technology required. So it's a mammoth task, I think, looking at these forts. This was a study carried out by researchers in Panhala, and you can look at the kind of analysis, XRD analysis of the stone, and looking at, you know, how this was done in one of the palace structures there. But it shows, you know, with time, with direction, what is the weathering of the stone material. So these kind of detailed stone studies need to be carried out in most of the forts before we take up conservation works. Structural cracks that are tentatively visible. The fortification in a lot of areas across these forts just remains underground. A lot of excavation is required. So potential for archaeological excavation is immense here. And some of the structures have been excavated by ASI as well as Archaeology Directorate in other forts. This shows the fort wall broken and shifting due to settlement, overgrowth on roofs, basic maintenance issues, and this is the stone changing color from black to shades of brown and showing seepage issues. Other things like signage issues, new structures, and, you know, broken masonry, deterioration of architectural elements or weathering of stone, and basic maintenance like cleaning and pointing that is required here. In this, I mean, we thought there is a tentative crack developing which needs to be looked at in further details, and other issues of access, seepage, drainage and leveling of ground around the granary. This is again the most exceptional feature in this case in Panhala are the granaries, which you don't find in any of the other 11 forts among the selected one. And you see within this, like, there are certain things like independent temples being maintained well. There are cave structures that require to further archaeological research, and basic signages and maintenance that is required. Historic pathway which is strongly associated with his with Shivaji's escape to Vishalgarh, and but the basic maintenance requires to be done, or even how we represent it, you know, presentation and interpretation and visitation, benches. There are some important historic structures which are unprotected, and new buildings that are developing. So serious issue of control guidelines that need to be developed, especially in this case. And of course the tourist hotels that are coming up, and kiosks, etc. for visitation. So for all these, a coherent language is required. And this is what, like, summarizing that these are the things for Panhala: geotechnical and stabilization of hill, geotechnical studies, fortification walls, excavation, stabilization, consolidation, repairs, looking at tourism amenities, structural consolidation, specifically of Teen Darwaza, and cleaning and pointing. So these were the immediate ones, but of course you have the later plans, sub-plans: conservation, tourism, traffic, natural resources, risk management, and financial management. All these need to be part of the site management plan. In the end, I would just like to show you examples, of what could be done. Like this is an example from the Sigiriya Fort in Sri Lanka, not too far from where they are our neighbors, but this is a World Heritage Site, and you can see the access that they have planned. These are just metal staircases, and they work both ways. So you have one for going up and one for going down. Something that would be ideal for the Balekila in Rajgarh, or other places in case of Maharashtra forts. It doesn't require too much money. It is easy to install and easy to install quickly rather than making something in stone and lime, and it works very well. So the kind of footfall they have and the way they maintain it, it's a very good example. And you can actually you need 2 hours to go up and come back. So these are some of the strategies that we can use for the Maharashtra forts. Also, have signages, benches which are more ambient in nature. They don't stand out, they are just part of the fort, but they are there when you need it, So these are some of the examples. Some we have used in some of our sites already, and you can see that these are just depending on what kind of stone the fort has. We could just have a similar language that goes through rather than making stylistic statements, which are more of an intervention. So this is the final slide, which says that the conservation policy as per Adanya Patra is what we should have for these forts. State level fort circuit should be created to also, like a visitor circuit for these, improving access to these forts, pathways, jetties, or universal access, which is very important. Interpretation and signage, then basic amenities, toilets and eating places, and using localized villages. Wherever we travel, we could actually have the village people providing us local food, which works very well. And that's how the forts should be managed, using the local communities and what they can offer. They should be the main stakeholders. And of course, risk management, which is a major issue. A lot of international visitors who have come to these forts have actually at times even been shocked the way we access the forts in terms of safety and all. This is our team, and thanks to the Directorate of Archaeology and Museums for this opportunity. Thank you.